going to open it up. So please, we'd like you to come forward and share some of the thoughts, the ideas, the stories, the wall-breaking new paradigm shifts that you've had in the over the past 10 minutes. If you have any questions for our panelists as well, please come forward. There are 2 microphones. Please be aware that the session is being filmed, but people asking questions will not appear in the filming. So if you do not want to be identified, then just don't identify yourself. You won't appear. Yeah. The cameras will remain focused on the stage the whole time. So, anyone? Any responses to these questions? Queue up behind the microphone. Behind the microphone. Yeah, just go ahead. I will take questions from the microphones alternately. So, just yeah.
A bit too tall, but okay. Yeah. Hi. Good morning. My name is Shah. A lot of people identify me as a mutt, maybe because of how I look and stuff like that. But on IC, I have a double barrel race. A lot of people don't know what's a double barrel race. So what I want to share is from our discussion between Huifeng and Africa is that which stories do you think we need to hear more of? Is often we hear stories about our Chinese friends, and our Malay friends, lesser of our Indian friends. So when she says that, we need to listen more about what our Indian friends have to say, it struck me that one of my friends, so I just casually talking to them about marriage. So it's 21st century, 2016, and I asked them, and then would you marry another Indian man or another Indian woman? And then they say, oh, yes. And sometimes you even have to look at the cars. So I'm like, the cars. People still look at cars in 2016. It's a very unheard of. And I thought it's only one friend. So I thought, okay, maybe I should ask another. And then they say, oh, yeah, my family still, talk about cars, So when they go and ask, and for example, like, oh, your girlfriend is Indian, okay. So which caste is she from? Or your boyfriend is Indian, okay. Which caste is he from? Or which part of India is he from and stuff like that. I'm like, wow. You look into all that, and I thought, like, Singapore, we are a first world country. We moved on from all this past caste system, and then I was totally shocked. And I thought just to share with you what I've learned from interacting with my Indian friends. Yeah, I think this is one of the few stories less unheard of, but it's still happening in Singapore. Yep.
If you wanted to offer a different story to this caste narrative, if you wanted your friends to change their minds, how do you think, what would you say to them?
I've questioned them, like, you're uni students, and you have some intellectual and intelligence and stuff like that, and why should you conform to your family beliefs? And then a lot of time I realized that sometimes because they are born in it, and then, it's part of their identity, and then they realize that, I cannot escape from this, so I just accept it. Yeah, which is a sad thing. I thought that, we should have more say, especially when it comes to marriage. And not only marriage, to any relationship, you shouldn't just conform to what your family has to say, or your identity in that matters and stuff like that. Yeah.
Thank you. Do any of you want to respond?
Yeah, that's all.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. We had a question from over here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dev. and I'm using an interpreter. My name is Yuan. I have a few questions about the Singapore story. It's wonderful how you shared. So many young people that are ignorant about the Singapore's history. So I have a few questions. I noticed that you have 3 groups, the Chinese, the Malay, and the Indians. But there was no mention of the Eurasian and the Peranakans. So recently, Schooling won the gold medal. Yeah, Joseph Schooling. Himself, he's Eurasian. So I've met many friends who are Malays, and they told me that they don't consider themselves Malays. So I asked why. And they said and explained further that under the IC, they are not allowed, they use the term Malay, but they're not allowed to use their ethnic origins. For example, the Javanese, the Suluk, and the different ethnic groups. So it seems like they have lost their cultural heritage, the traditions. So I'm wondering how the Malay people in this audience feel. And also many of my Chinese friends today, they feel that they have lost their dialects as well, because the government has forced us to speak only in Mandarin. And so it's become mainstream now, the use of Mandarin. And in the history textbooks, in schools, that are used in school, in the school system, in the school curriculum, I would like to know what your views are about the school textbooks that was designed. Are the facts in there accurate? Are they correct? I would like to know. Because many people, the young people, are ignorant about the different narratives other than the one that we know, which is the one Singapore story.
I think the reason, and I always like to avoid it, to not basically reinforce, to see my own models in the kinds of research that I do. But it is, and how should I put it? Every time I speak to someone who identifies as Malay and the kinds of struggles they have living in Singapore, most of the times the comparisons are always made with the Chinese. And that gets reiterated, as if race is only Chinese and Malay in Singapore and the Indian is an afterthought. And then they'll start to realize, oh, the Indian is missing in the picture. But whenever I do my research, it's not to reinforce that this phenotypical classification is the only story of race, is the only way to go. And what I do in my research is to actually make it messy. That what we categorize as Malay or Chinese or Indian or other, at the end of the day, is nothing but something that is defined upon us and given to us, bestowed upon us. And what do we do with these categories? So people like Sakina, the woman, the hijab woman who is basically shattering her grandmother, she basically debunks that classification to show how that categories are actually limiting and insufficient to the richness of everyday interactions, where we come from, who we think we are, and who we feel belong to. For example, I am Malay Muslim, and I'm Malay Muslim because my parents are Malay, I speak Malay sometimes, and I'm Muslim because I'm born with the religion. And these are the things that I don't question until I go to the US, for instance, and someone asks you, where are you from? And I say, I'm from Indiana. No, I mean really, where are you really from? So I say, well, I'm from Singapore. And they go, oh, so you're Chinese. And I'm like, no, I'm not Chinese, I'm Malay. What? I thought Singapore is in China. So I get that a lot. And it's only then that I reiterate my Malayness as a way to basically counter this sense of hegemonic Chineseness that Singapore government likes to portray or present in their official narratives. But at the end of the day, I believe that the CMIO model has to go. But it has become so entrenched in how we think of ourselves that it has conferred meaning upon the very people we call Singaporeans. So even if people feel that living in a CMO model is limiting, they do actually conform to it because they find it meaningful. And what do we do to change when we think about something that's meaningful, at the same time also limiting? How do we go forward from here?
I think it's when there are official categories and official categorization, that's a very powerful thing on several different levels. Art has already pointed out that it shapes meaning, meaning it shapes the kinds of self-identification that people have and develop, right? And the ways in which they start to think about themselves become solidified within that category. And it shapes the ways people interact with one another as well, because there are these assumptions that people within this category share more within the category than across the categories, right? So it also shapes our social and public interactions with one another. And very importantly, it shapes what can and cannot be said, right? Because accompanying the CMIO, the categorization, is also a sense that there are dangers in unpacking and loosening the categories, right? That the categories are important for maintaining some kind of peace and harmony. And so it makes it very hard for us in some ways to deal with the actual complexities of people's cultures and people's belief systems, people's habits, and the complexity within each category is very hard to address. I would point out that this is an example of how power is not just negative, it's not just repressive, but also productive. It's creating content. Yeah? It's creating things that didn't exist before, not just repressing certain things. And that's very important, that power is productive, right? Including productive of meanings that people come to attach to very deeply, which are much more difficult to address than to say the state has these problematic categories, right? And also, I mean, as an academic and a sociologist, these categories are also difficult in that they have become really solidified as variables. They're assumed to have such a self-explanatory similarity. All Malays share this, all Chinese share that. Therefore, we can treat them as these static variables and try to find the differences across the groups. That's the starting point, right? And when you do that, that actually adds a further layer to these categories becoming real. So, it may be that there's obviously a history to how the categories come about, but once the categories come about, they do take on a life of its own and they become real and meaningful. And you can't just say, if we ignore them, they cease to be real. So they continue to be very powerful in all of those different ways.
I just want to respond to the speaking of Mandarin and the official stories that our children are having in schools today. For me, the Speak Mandarin campaign, say what you like, I feel sorry for all of us in Singapore because my children never have the chance to understand what my parents' lives are because they can't speak Teochew, they don't understand. They will say, what did your mother say? And it's very sad state because within one generation, there is a complete gap of knowledge from our parents to our children. There are no stories that are being handed down. And this is where we start to lose so-called our cultural identity and what have you. And for me also, why you can be bilingual, trilingual, but why do you have to force our children just to learn Mandarin. If I want to learn Indonesia or Thai or Vietnamese other than English, why can't I do that? Why must it be Chinese because I'm Chinese? You know, because other countries have done it successfully. Why do we doubt that Singaporeans have less ability to learn more languages? You know, so all these issues, I think it's a sad state because we don't have people who have strong beliefs to say that, no, this should not be done and we can do it this way. We don't have this kind of people around. So now we are suffering from all this. Yeah.
Thank you. I think Yitling has a very good point, which I think everyone has hinted at. We have agency. We have the ability to decide for ourselves what our identity is and what we want it to be. And one of the things we're trying to do today is to help give you the tools to resist attempts to impose an identity on yourself, to help you define your own identity, to help you build the narrative that supports that identity. So I'd really love to, yes, please.
Hi, my name is Douglas. I just want to thank the four of you. Isn't this an amazing morning? Yeah, I'm overwhelmed with the inspiration, the way you all tell your stories. So for me on this out there in here, just a couple weeks ago I was asked to do a video where I work, and I thought it was nice that somebody cares about my opinion. And I was walking out after doing this little 2-minute thing, and I saw on the board Chinese, Malay, Indian, and others, and I saw my name under the others, you know. And so I was struck by my own inner thing about feeling like I believe that we should make sure all the races are represented, but then seeing my name in a category felt kind of creepy, you know, like that. And then I know that when I go to coffee shops, when I sit in a coffee shop for breakfast, and I see a Caucasian walk in, I hear my brain go, what's an Ang Mo doing here? Which is kind of strange thing, and of course then I realize part of my identity. So so anyway, thanks for all the stories. And then I have a question. It might be for you, PJ, but this title of this session, I saw something that one of my friends posted on Facebook just in the last week or two about one of the Singapore narratives about the racial riots that happened in the 60s. Yeah. And I think there's a narrative, and then there's all this stuff around there that the Malays and the Chinese, you know, that it was really antagonistic between the races. And I think there's probably multiple ways to tell that particular story. Would any of you, or maybe, I don't know if it's more for PJ because you're a historian, a way to tell that story which is a little bit different than that the Malays were, that there was an uprising or something against the Chinese.
Have you read my note on Facebook?
It must have been you then.
Yes.
I thought it might be, but
yes,
because you are one of those revisionists, aren't you? Yes. So anyway, can you
see what I mean? You see labels?
So can you share that? Because it actually came up this morning over our little breakfast thing, and can you share that?
Okay, I don't want to take up too much time because there are other people questions. And it's on Facebook already. But fundamentally, I pointed out that the 1964 race riots were created primarily because of political circumstances, because selfish politicians on both sides of the causeway manipulated and inflamed racial tensions in order to achieve their own narrow political goals. So one way of looking at the race riots, obviously, is the fact that, yes, people of different races fought each other in the streets that day. But that would never have happened if the politicians hadn't first inflamed the situation, if Lee Kuan Yew hadn't gone to the Tunku and said, the Chinese in Singapore are communists and chauvinists and are going to take over, and then after that, from there, destroy the rest of Malaya, you know, and then use that to then scare the Tunku into agreeing to merger, right? And then politicians after that on both sides, once we were in Malaysia, arguing for their political goals to try and win votes by saying that the other races were going to destroy us and can't be trusted. So I argue that a better way of looking at the riots in 1964 is really that we have to hold politicians accountable, that there have to be checks and balances, that there has to be transparency in order to prevent them from using these things for their own narrow political goals. And I urge people to reclaim their history by calling the 64 riots, the 1964 political riots, to remind ourselves of the more fundamental reason why they happened. So if you'd like to know more, I have a note on Facebook. You can look at my Facebook page, facebook.com/pjthumb. I have a note there. But yes, let's take another question from the lady over there.
So my name is Catherine, and I'm visiting here for just 2 days. I was lucky enough to be here during this really amazing workshop and get-together today, so I'm really excited. I didn't, let's see, so I am headed to Taiwan to do some workshops there, and the group that I work with in the US is a nonprofit that studies nonviolent action and different kinds of civil resistance around the world historically. So Gandhi, civil rights movements, women's rights movements, the Arab Spring, just think very broadly. And so I'm not a specialist in Singapore society, so I'm really excited to be here and to actually be learning a lot. And it's interesting to me to think about walking in here and being in Singapore, which is a beautiful country and city, to just look around, and I don't have any of those preconceived notions that people living in this society have, because I have no idea who's supposed to be dominant or who's in power, who is not in power. I just see a great mix of people around me who are really interesting and have been really friendly. And so to hear what people have to live in within the constructs of the society, and again, I know something about it, but it's very interesting to me. Another thing I wanted to mention was I work with a lot of groups. I work with an amazing woman activist who is now a male activist who's transgender and who went through probably some of the things that we've heard about. And she's an amazing, and he now a courageous person who is from Palestine, who's also Muslim, and who very much identifies with both of those identities, and has actually been more supported by her grandmother in Palestine, who you would think would be very traditional, who has really said, I don't care, you were a granddaughter, now you're my grandson, I love you and I'm proud of you, and however your identity needs to be for you is what matters. So I would one of my questions is, how have you all been received in kind of standing up for not having those identities, whether it's outside, as you mentioned, the norm, or within the structure? The last thing I wanted to mention that we talked a little bit about is, and I'm still thinking through this, is in our field we've learned that around the world what makes successful movement or campaign for change is unity, but diversity in that unity. So having a lot of different groups and inclusion across groups, but with a unified vision of where they're going. And what I've heard today is that it's also so important to deconstruct that unity. And to hear the individual stories and the differences. So I guess my question there would be, I'm thinking through, maybe it's about deconstructing and learning the individual stories and identities and uniqueness, and then maybe reconstructing a different unity and a different vision around that. And so any responses to whether that makes sense or not? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I will address the deconstruction part. I think there is power in deconstruction. And the thing about deconstructing is that although we feel that stories should not be like, there should not be unity, we should deconstruct dominant narratives, the truth is that the alternative seldom has that much ground or traction or power as the dominant narrative. For example, when I was working with the government, I was working in an early childhood agency, and they would put up pictures of Chinese teachers and advertise these images. And then my director would say, where are the Malays and where are the Indians? I want some minority teachers on the poster. And so I asked her the question, look, we don't have a photographer at hand to take photos of minorities teaching other children. Because all that we have, that we paid, all of them, they almost always take pictures of Chinese teachers for some reason, because that's the majority, even though there's a lot of Malays and Indian people, Indian teachers in the service. And then I asked her, but actually, what is your point of having CMIO in your pictures? And she says, to show diversity. And I said, is there diversity on the ground? You can't show a picture showing Chinese, Malay, Indian, and other as the alternatives, but in reality, only, like, even in the mainstream anchor operators childcare industry, right, only 13 centers offer Malay language out of a possible 1,000. Less known for Tamil. So what is the point of diversity here if you're only teaching Chinese as the only mother tongue language in Singapore? So sometimes when we want to deconstruct, and sometimes when we want to propose alternatives, sometimes when we want to give representation, we must also consider that every representation, okay, has its stake in power, and how much power is given to that representation. Because ultimately it still becomes subsumed under that dominant narrative, and worse, as tokens. And that erases, okay? So, which is why whenever I stand in front of a crowd and I teach, I always focus on my identity as Malay, because I don't want someone to go, oh, you're so not like Malay, and what does that mean? Oh, you're so successful. Again, I ask them, what does that mean? When I take the cab to Dover Road, the cab driver would ask me, are you dropping off at ITE? And I'm like, no, I'm going to NUS. Again, there's no problem with Malay dropping off at ITE, but I'm going to NUS. And he's like, oh, you work there as secretary? I'm like, why do you assume such things? I teach there. And he shuts up. And I say, why you keep quiet, uncle? You know? And I've taught students at NTU, and I've had amazing minority students who come up to me, whether they're gay, lesbian, Indian, or Malay, or lower class or lower income students. They come up to me and say, you standing in front of me, teaching me is a very powerful representation. Because very rarely do we see a minority who's brave enough to reassert their identity as the failed Malay, okay? I'm a failed Malay. I failed my classes all the time. It's just luck that I'm here. And again, my family is very privileged. My mother is upper income, and that's why I'm here. And when students tell me that, they feel that they can basically be like Joseph Schooling and break new ground. So that's the power of representation, when you put it in the right context.
I think that one of the points I was trying to make in my remarks today is that deconstruction is sort of part one, and then reconstruction is really important. You know, that there has to be something beyond just taking apart something, and you have to be offering something else, right? That challenges the thing you took apart. But I wanted to also echo what Art has just said about how these stories and their dominance over social life is partly because it's not merely ideology. It's not just about ideas. It's not in the realm of ideas that this struggle is happening. Yeah, and it's not just that people believe these messages and therefore, you know, they act in certain ways. Instead, practices are shaped in the everyday partly because, you know, people have to negotiate specific policies to get access to public goods, for example, right? So they have to perform family in a certain way, they have to perform gender in a certain way, they have to perform being good workers in a certain way, and that is what renders the categories real, yeah? And certain principles, what I've written about this idea called what I call differentiated deservedness, that this is a key principle in a lot of our public policies, differentiated deservedness. It's deeply embedded in our policies. So it's not just about, you know, that there is discrimination against certain race by a race. Of course, that is true, yeah? It's not just about that. But it's that it produces these ideas, oh, to be a good Chinese, you also have to be straight. To be straight actually is not enough, okay? You have to be married at a certain point in your life course, apply for your flat, stay married, have the appropriate number of children, appropriate meaning appropriate to your class, yeah? Have the right gender, you know, gender division of labor, etc., right? And these are the everyday practices that give meaning then to those categories, meaning that producing, you know, what it means to be a woman, producing what it means to be a man, producing what it means to be a Chinese or a Malay, yeah? And most people are not going around really thinking about these stories they hear in school or outside of school. But everyone is trying to make their way through life, through each of these things, yeah? So I think that's really important. And I wanted to come back to this idea of agency, as well as the first question that was raised about, caste and the importance of caste and why it's still important. And I think that there are limits to how much individuals can resist. Right? I think it's too much to ask when the norms are so strong. It's too much to ask individuals to just ignore the norms. And so, of course, agency is important, but I think individuals will find it very difficult to say, I will just reject this category. And even if you rejected it, as you're moving through space, people will still treat you as the category they think you are. So it's not like I can decide, well, I'm not a Chinese woman anymore, and you have to deal with me accordingly. I can't, right? I am still embodied, yeah? And so you don't get to shape how people deal with you on an everyday basis, right? So I don't think as individuals it's so easy for individuals to just say, I don't believe those categories exist. You can don't believe gravity doesn't exist, but you're still bound by it, right? I think it's similar. So I think, again, collective action is really important. I think that's why these forums are really important. Building of solidarity is very important, because what we cannot do alone, we can do together. Yeah, and we can find spaces where we feel stronger because we are together, because someone else has our back. Yeah, and we can form these communities where we have alternative stories that give us dignity, that give us a sense that it's okay that people outside don't think that I'm great, but I have some small group of people who think I'm awesome. Yeah, thanks.
Cool, thanks. Okay, question over here. If you have a question, please queue up behind the mic. We're almost out of time, so if any of you have any more questions, and I'd really love to hear from some more self-reflective questions. A lot of questions or comments we've had have been about other people, or been just straight out questions. But if anyone has anything self-reflective, we'd love to hear from you. Okay, yes.
Do you want to maybe take 2 or 3 and then answer because of time?
Okay.
Hi, my name is Sherlyn, and I have a self-reflective comment that I want to make. I'm Indian, but I took Malay. I can't speak Hindi, which is what I'm supposed to speak. Throughout the 4 decades I've been here on this planet, I have been in various socio-economic stratum, whatever. So I've experienced what it's like to have money and to not have money, and to be married, and now I'm a widow and a single parent. So I've gone through all that stuff. What I have taken away from this so far is that our stories are very important. There is no like general label you can put on people and slap on people, as much as we want to do that. But I think what Yuyan just said about, when you deconstruct, what is the reconstruction going to be? And that also, I think it's very pertinent for us to understand that, we all come up here and we have our individual stories, and sometimes we feel like freaks because our stories don't match the universal narrative. I am a lecturer with tattoos. So, and practically everywhere I go, I feel I don't fit, except in a place like this, of course. So, I think it's really important that we come together and we do things like this, because you're right. So we deconstruct, we come out and we tell our own stories, right? And that's something I have a real soft spot for, telling our individual stories, how important that is, because there's just too much of the universal narrative going out there, and it's just, washing everybody out. Our stories are very important, but I think it's important that we stand together. We understand that in this diversity, there is so much that we can do for ourselves. And like what Yuyan was saying, coming together after deconstructing, coming together again to reconstruct what it means for us to be here together in Singapore as a human being, so on and so forth. So thank you so much for all that you have contributed this morning in terms of racial profiling, and in terms of the ideologies that are out there, because it really made me think of who I am and what I can do. And now that I'm equipped with all of this, it's time for us to start going out there and doing something and being proud. Do you watch Suicide Squad? Own it, man. For all the story that you have behind you, you killed somebody, you did drugs, you did all kinds of stuff. Own it, and then go out there and inspire. Thank you.
Thanks, Shirley. I too am a lecturer with a tattoo, so solidarity. Question over here?
Good afternoon.
Don't worry, don't.
I think what's really interesting is that when Art was speaking about how she, when people say like she was supposed to go to IT and NUS, and some of you actually chuckled and laughed. I didn't laugh. In fact, it resonated very strongly with me because throughout my whole life, since primary school, I'm supposed to go to ITE. Like all my parents' friends, I was like, oh, which ITE is he from? Not even a poly, you know. Like immediately, like when I was 16, dia dah pada ITE mana? Or like when I grew up, like, am I visiting a school for like work or something? So I think what most people don't understand is that sometimes in the minority itself, there is a minority within a minority. And according to some people, now I am a success. Like what Art says, you know, like when I go to NUS, it's like, what's it for? I'm a student. Like, are you sure? And a lot of my friends say that until I open my mouth, people will think I'm not, I cannot speak, or I don't really know what things are about. So now I'm straddling between the lines. Okay, the so-called less educated Malays don't see me as part of them, and the educated Malays don't see me as part of them because I'm apparently a Mat. Okay, so then comes a question that I think a lot of the Singapore public don't really notice, even in the Malay community. That then now we're talking about Chinese versus Malay versus Indian. You are forgetting the fact that there is a struggle within the community itself. There is now a divide between the educated Malays versus the non-educated Malays. Okay, so for all our talk about, how do you say this? Interracial conflicts and all that, right? Some of us are trying to make a better living within our community itself, but we are facing struggles trying to achieve that. Because like, let's say I'm trying to help the underprivileged community in the Malays who are underprivileged. I am met with resistance. They're like, oh, you're not one of us. What are you talking about? I'm not one of you. Like, look at me. You know, but they don't identify with me because I am so-called educated, which makes no sense to me. So I guess I would just like to sort of like enlighten you guys about the harsh realities that we actually face in this society. Yeah, so thank you.
Hi, okay, my name's Jessica. The thing is, the kind of questions I want to ask is perhaps a little controversial, but sort of coming on from, talking about these identities that sort of straddle different categories, very messy. But the thing is, even as we accept that the messiness has value, like we said, we do still have to go on to the step of like reconstructing everything to find that unity. So I find that, at least because for me, in my experience, I meet a lot of different types of people. My girlfriend is sort of nominally Malay Muslim, but for a lot of reasons, she doesn't really consider herself a Muslim, but still Muslim, still tied to all the cultures, the community, everything. Yeah, so, but the thing is, it's sort of like, why, when all these things are conflicting, and we have clearly, we meet a lot of people who strongly believe in, who strongly disagree with the things we say. For example, my girlfriend frequently complains about her own community. She more or less agrees with the narrative that Malays are usually lazy and all those things. And quite frequently, it also comes out from that history of herself being alienated from what was supposed to be her own community. So the problem here is sort of like how we can really bring all these stories up and find that thing that we call about the common ground. But at the same time, it seems as if we are sort of not ready to go towards that, or we are not willing to accept that in order to move forward, we have to find something that is more, maybe not exactly universal, but something that collectively we can say that this is what it is, we can actually point to it. beyond just sharing our stories with each other, which has a lot of value. Personally, I believe in that, but also because I find quite frequently we're at deadlock, hitting a wall. We don't really get anywhere beyond just talking to each other. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a question?
Yeah, is my question? What was my question? Very blur.
Okay.
Yes, and how we can do it. Yeah, I know it's like a very difficult one, but yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We have 2 more questions. Is that okay? We're actually out of time, so keep it short. Thank you.
Hi. Actually, I'm coming from a perspective that we need to be more culturally. I've forgotten the word suddenly. We need to actually appreciate other people's culture and also know that everyone has this individual story to tell. So my question is that do you think that maybe in the education system, especially the first 10 years of our lives, do you think that there's something that can be done so that everyone can be more culturally competent? That's the word. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question.
Oh, sorry. It's not a question, seriously. It's just like reflections about what I've been hearing. It's about like people saying about races, about like, you know, the values, you know. Concluded it, everything, end of the day, I would just say it is like empower yourself, educate yourself. Take the notion of knowing that if you can identify yourself with a, you know, you can't even unify, just like she was sharing, to unify with one objective of like fighting for what, you know, for marginalized, for what community, for what issue, LGBT, what issue? You just simplify by saying, I'm a Malay. But even like he was sharing also, it was a fact. Even in Malay, we have also been cast, not only in Indian, but we as a Malay ourselves, you know, when we seek for help from any of the community organization, we are denied from the being receive of the helps. You see? So, end of the day, it's not the racist issue. It's basically, it's like identify yourself and knowing what are you actually wanted to do? What are you fighting for? Okay, what are you going for? I mean, if you are differentiate between the races, you will never find the issue because everybody have personal issue. But getting the roots of like understanding the whole things that you can really identify with everything and change the structure of the system. Because what you need to change is the system, not us, because we are having the problem now. I'm having a problem. You all having a problem with the system, correct? So why differentiate about the racial? You know, there's nothing about the racial. It's the system that is bothering us now. Okay?
Okay, any responses? Oh, okay. If you keep it really quick,
All right.
we're actually...
Okay, so my name is Hannah, and I just wanted to add that when I was doing a conference in Dubai for my PhD, which is ironically the Voices of the Unheard, so there were people from other countries that actually said to me, oh, we thought that Singapore was so perfect. We didn't know that there was so many problems, and when I flashed the number of the percentages of Chinese, Malay, Indian, and others having degrees. Malay only 11%, and the Chinese like 60%, 50%, Indian 66%, and so on. So the Malays like we're like only 1/6 of the Chinese, for example. So there are preconceived notions, and I think for us, and again, ironically, when I go out of the country, people want to hear my story more than the people in the country. So the Chinese, I'm so sorry to say this, I'm not being racist or anything, but they kind of like look away, and then you can feel that they feel sorry, but it's kind of still in a denial thing. Whenever we have a conversation that actually has diversity, you can see that Chinese have, when we ask about national identity, theirs is always so positive, and then when you ask the Indian and the Malays, and there's always a problem. And the Indians will agree with whatever the Malay is saying. The Malay will be like, yeah, I so agree, I so agree. That kind of thing. Then the Chinese will be like, yeah. I mean, you don't know how it feels to, when you go to the canteen, right, you can only eat from one stall. Then after that, so, then I want to just address about the student activism and as educators themselves, because I'm one. As an educators, what roles can we play to change the narrative for the students? Because now we notice that last time in the 70s, you have student bodies who are damn strong. But right now the students, what the hell are they doing at NUS? You can see right now. And I'm so sorry. Okay, then like with the whole like, you know, that whole hoo-ha about that thing. So instead of focusing on issues like that, what can we as educators do to empower the students to actually be like the 16, 17-year-olds in the 70s? Lee Kuan Yew was someone who was like that, you know. All the old activists from 1965, they were all like that. But what have we lost within this 51 years that we became who we are right now? And the most important thing that's happening at NUS is dunking a girl into some pool, right? So that's my question as an educator. What can we do more to be more aware of these less heard stories and actually do something about it?
All right. I just wanted to say two things basically on the race issue and then to the activism thing. On the question of race, as I was telling some people that actually when you grow up with neighbors who are Malays or Indians, you think that it's only very natural to just interact with all these cultural differences and all that. But for me, because I have neighbors who are Tamils, Hindus, Muslims and others and all that, I always feel that I am a very unusual Singaporean. I just realized when I was an adult, actually I didn't know that I was a very unusual Singaporean, because when you start to go to campuses and all that, you meet friends who have never have Malay friends or Indian friends, and that I thought was quite unusual. But it has become worse today in Singapore because of your SEP school that, oh, you must do Mandarin and you go higher Chinese. And my children, my son especially, I don't think he has Malay friends or Indian friends, you know, because of the schools that they attend. So that has become worse. So that is the sad situation that we have in Singapore, although we celebrate Harmony Day and what have you and all that, you know. So it becomes very cosmetic rather than the substance, right? On the student activism, actually today, it's again another sad story that we have, because you place so much obstacles and rules and regulations on our young minds who are actually the so-called future leaders. And if you don't let them decide on what issues are important in their lives now, look, at this prime of their lives, if they don't develop any passion, I tell you, when you go up to 30, 40 years old, there's no more passion left, okay? Because you're so busy making money, what talk about passion? You have to make your living and earn to buy your HDB flat and pay for your mortgage. Hello, what passion you're talking about? So it's a very sad state that our university continue to place all these obstacles on our young students to say what they can do and what they cannot do. So I rest my case lah.
How to follow from there? I agree with Idling. I think that students face a lot of structural, students as much as us who are not students face a lot of structural barriers to organizing. So in many ways, I don't think we can blame students when they aren't involved in activism. But as educators, I think in everyday work, we can try to introduce. We can think about what we teach, and we can think about the frameworks and the common sense that we try to sort of share with our students, right? And that it can be in every course. So for several years now, I've decided, you know, in every course that I teach, I don't care what course it is, I will always teach some stuff that is about gender and about feminism. And it's not limited. I'm not ghettoizing gender studies in a gender class, right? So that some of these, so that in every course that I teach, you know, there is exposure to some of these ideas, exposure to some of these texts. And you can do the same, whatever your specialty is in, right? That some of these ideas that are meant to allow students to ask questions outside of the normal frameworks of asking questions can be integrated into every course. And I find that students are very receptive. And if you talk about it as if it's natural, they also don't resist it, right? And they are very, they're refreshed by it, right? That is something new, yeah? And that triggers sort of this interest to continue learning. And I think that's really important, to sort of not hard sell everything, you know, but to kind of naturalize it and make it common sense in everything that you do. It's not taboo. If I talk about it, it's not taboo. Therefore, you can talk about it too, yeah? I wanted to also address this question of what happens within activist communities. And I think within activist communities, not just in Singapore, but everywhere, that we also, of course, face this challenge of taking on the same narrative structure that the dominant society has, right? So, as I said today, part of what the structure of the narrative is that it flattens, right? It wants to be this, no, yeah? We're flat structure, yeah? That flat story. And I think within activist communities, particularly in places where it's difficult to form coalitions, it's difficult to create unity, I think we actually find this structure very appealing as well, because we want to talk about diversity and difference, and we want to encourage, you know, many cultural views, but we are scared to talk about power and inequality because that divides us from within, right? And we are already a tenuous community. So that's very hard. But I think that's exactly what we need to do. We need to go beyond just talking about difference and diversity. We need to talk about power and inequality. We need to, of course, we need to talk about embracing, you know, cultural diversity and all kinds of different diversity. But we also have to talk about redistribution. You know, we also have to talk about like what is entailed, who has to give up what, and you know, who is the appropriate speaker for what, and who is the appropriate person to shut up and stand to the side for what, right? And I think that's really important. If we don't confront that within the community there are also great inequalities and power differences, then I don't see how we're going to disrupt that narrative structure.
I've actually taught for Yu Yan before, and it's amazing to teach for her. In my classes that I've taught at NTU and US, I teach with humor. A lot of humor, and bringing like everyday examples and matching up with theory. For example, if I'm teaching about Karl Marx and labor exploitation, I talk about what it feels like to be in love with someone who doesn't love you back. What it feels like to be with an abusive partner, talking about the state and violence. And students get it. They get it. And when I teach through humor, I also teach with empathy, and a lot of empathy. Meaning, newspaper articles do not just become statistics. The students live in it. So for clueless students, I make them drown in it. So for example, there's a case study of a Malay woman who is ill, cannot work, single, and has 4 children, unmarried. What do you do if you are her? And so I make students imagine that they are in her position and go and find help. So NTU students would scramble, get on their laptops, trying to Google the best way they can find to help her. And every single Google search brings no return because that woman doesn't fall into any classification. And then they know the poor pays more, always. But if it was them, and in their position, they realized that if they were married, they could have gotten these subsidies, etc., etc. So this is the first realization that classifications do not work. And responding to your question over there, what do we do when we are in this deadlock? I always believe in teaching intersectionality, because I believe that when we constantly look for intersections weakens classification. And from there, we can then redistribute power, rebuild, imagine narratives. And when I teach also, I'm also like a motivational guru. I always tell my students, go and find your purpose in life, go and find meaning. We are here in sociology, and your degree is as worth like, what do you call it, worthy of like toilet paper rolls. But look at me. I can manage to find a career out of it, and so can you, because you got to believe that what you do is meaningful. Why are you here? Why are you telling a story? So thank you.
Okay, this has been a great session. I have learned a lot. And if I can just share one thing, especially for the gentleman, when I was in Sec 4, MOE sent me a letter offering me a place at ITE. Today, I'm an Oxford professor, right? So, the letter from ITE arrived at the same time an acceptance letter from Harvard arrived. So don't let the system tell you what you can and cannot do, where you should and shouldn't go. Because other people can recognize your value. But most importantly, you need to recognize your own value as a person, as a human being. And it's hard. I know it's hard, right? Fighting the system, fighting all these dominant narratives is hard. But that's why we're all here together today. And that's what I've really learned, that if we stick together, if we work together, if we build this space together, if we build a progressive movement together, we can succeed. So at the session at 6 o'clock, I'm going to be talking about some of the lessons I've learned from these past 2 weeks with the Contempt of Court bill and how I think we can work together to build a progressive movement. So I do hope you will join me there if you can. But even if you can't, I just want to remind you that the conversations don't end here. The conversations don't end today. Keep talking with each other. Keep supporting each other. Only through unity can we together build a better world. So thank you very much. And please join me in thanking our speakers. And thank you to all the questions, and thank you to organizers. Okay.